Hi, and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me on this show is Linda Mariani, and she's a mentor teacher for the Mountain Oaks Charter School. Linda, it's nice to have you in the program.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Well, it's really my pleasure to have you on. You have been very instrumental in the growth of the education community in Calaveras County and many other aspects of the county. And for those who don't know part of that story, I'm looking forward to sharing it with them and making sure that they know how some of these things came about. So very excited to have you on tonight.
Well, what's kind of fun, Joel, is that you've been kind of probing into who I am, but I've known you since you were about 2 years old. And so it's kind of that reversal now. And it was very kind of surprising to me when we were originally talking, like, oh, you did this? Oh, this was your background?
Right. It's odd because I feel like I've known you my whole life, because I have.
You have.
And yet some of those questions, kind of figuring out your background, I really didn't know. So that was kind of really intriguing for me to find out your story. But one memory that I don't have myself, but I was told, was that when I was very young, I think maybe 2 or 3, I escaped my parents' watch one time and brought a handful, was it plums, up to the upper house to share with you and others. And you had to take me back down to my parents when I was young. So I guess I was adventurous from the start.
Yes.
We could take that away from that. So you've been a passionate person your whole life. You've had lots of things that you've just thrown yourself into completely. And education turned out to be the passion. Would you say that that's one of the main passions in your life is education?
Yes, most definitely. And it takes so many different forms. It's just not in the classroom necessarily. But everything from supporting my younger brothers, I had 5 younger brothers, and helping them in their growing up. I can remember one brother kind of wailed out in frustration. He said, "It's hard enough taking directions from one mother, but I have to have 2." So that was my childhood, was taking care of them and being involved in and nurturing instructional, developmental way all the way through. So I think that has been kind of my nature. And when I was 14, I started a therapeutic riding program with horses, but I didn't know that's what it was called then. We just did it, you know. And so teaching has been there.
So before we get into your time in Calaveras County and the things that you've done here, I wanted to just introduce you to viewers all the way back. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cupertino in the middle of a prune orchard. After the war, my father bought 4 prefab houses that were very small, and he kind of pieced them together and kind of plunked them in the middle of the orchard, and that's where my whole childhood was. And it was just totally awesome because we could ride, we had our responsibility with all the animals. Mom would just say, "Just tell me the direction you're going," and we'd take off for the whole day, and just had to be back before dark. That was it.
And your family got very involved in the production of fruit and dried fruit and things like that. Is that correct? Or
my grandfather.
Your grandfather did?
My grandfather
okay.
was the pioneer, and he came over from Croatia and was so overwhelmed at the beauty and the soil in the Santa Clara Valley. And I had the opportunity about 4 years ago to go back to his hometown and saw where he was trying to farm. And he had to walk a whole day to where his family's vineyards were.
Oh my gosh.
And so he would go at the beginning of the week and walk back, and the area to actually grow things was very small because they had to just pull all the rocks out. And they just kept on coming up every spring. So the Santa Clara Valley was just paradise for him. So that's what he put his heart and soul into, and then my father carried it forward.
And so when you were young, you learned the value of hard work. You learned to be outside. You were very a part of things. You didn't necessarily just go to the store and buy things. Did you even raise your own meat? Is that correct?
We did. We had our own gardens. Dad had a very strong work ethic, and he learned how to work when he was very young. And it was very important to him that we did the same thing. And so we were responsible for all the animals. We were responsible for the gardens. He started out, he bought two little head of cattle that we were to take care of. And then at the end of the year, we sold them and then bought 4 and kind of built up our herd that way. And it was difficult sometimes, because I remember when it was July, the cattle got out and went to a neighbor's, and they had all of their apricots drying out on the trays. And they ran through their yard. And so we had, as kids, we had to reimburse them for the trays and the crop. And because it was our responsibility, so we had to learn the hard way, a lot of things. Plus, we had to go back and apologize, and I think that was just about as hard.
All right, yeah, for sure. So you moved through schools, you had the opportunity to go to good schools, and you embraced education from a young age. You really loved to learn.
Yes.
You really just sucked it all up.
Yes.
And then you had this passion for horses, like you said. You were using horses to help people, and even though there wasn't necessarily a name for that, or you didn't have a specific
Right.
clinic, that's what you were doing. But then you got into college, and where did you first attend college?
First was Gonzaga up in Spokane, Washington, and it was a small school then. It's not as small now.
No.
Then I had the opportunity to go to Rome, Italy, through Loyola of Chicago, and that was just a most incredible experience, because I combined my literature, my history, art, and all those things focused and on the ancient history and ancient literature and ancient art, and just lived it, absolutely lived it there. And I think that's where I've realized how important it is to be physically and environmentally connected to what you're learning.
Not just reading it in a book and then
Absolutely.
trying to absorb it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that became very clear to you. And you also were studying some psychology at some point as well?
Then when I returned, I went to Berkeley, and I had finished my English and history majors, and I thought, So that's when I started developmental psychology. And there again, I worked with the professors there, and we developed tests and things like that we took out into the schools, and again, hands-on. It wasn't just something that we just read about, and it was very, very meaningful. And then took that and got my teaching credential at Berkeley also.
And so you did some teaching in that area to start, was that right? Or-
Actually, my first teaching job was in Maryland.
It was in Maryland. Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
So I lived in D.C. Actually, that was what was incredible. I lived in Washington, D.C. during Martin Luther King's assassination and Bobby Kennedy's.
Oh my goodness.
So lived that history also.
Wow. Wow.
Was there when D.C. was burning with the riots and everything.
Oh my gosh. So through a series of different events, you did come back west and did some teaching there. And then eventually you found yourself in Calaveras County, and something happened to you. You came here and something clicked. Is that kind of close to what happened? You realized this was the place for you.
I was newly married to someone who had property up Jesus Maria called Gambettas, and he introduced me to your parents. And I was so inspired from your mother homeschooling that I decided to homeschool too. And part of it was we were only going to be here for 1 year. We were doing like a year sabbatical out in the mountains. And I think we were here about 6 weeks, maybe not much more. And I just said, you know, I can't go back.
Okay.
I can't go back. There's so much authenticity to the way we were living and to the people that we had become friends with, so we haven't, and it's been almost 30 years.
Wow. And I mean, the ranch on which you lived is just one of the most beautiful places in the county. It really
Yes.
is. There's a river going through and rolling hills, and you're up where there are some pines mixed with oak trees, and a lot of history there too.
Yes.
All the way back to Native Americans, and then this Italian family
Yes.
that built these massive stone walls and all kinds of neat stuff. So, I mean, I can see why you fell in love with the ranch, but then the county as a whole came along
Yes.
with that. So you were inspired to homeschool. You made that decision. That is a big decision. That's not something to be taken lightly. Was homeschooling versus the public system, was it what you expected, or did it surprise you? Did it change your perception?
Well, I started by borrowing books from the schools that the children had been to previously, thinking I was going to just follow the same program. And that lasted maybe about 3 weeks to a month. And then I realized that I thought, my goodness, if we're only here for a year, I want them to totally live and experience this lifestyle. And at that point, we were off-grid. We had just a single little black plastic pipe that supplied our water, and no electricity or anything like that. And we had over 100 animals by that time. And I thought, I want my children to learn how to build rabbit hutches and dog houses. And I can remember one of the best things that ever happened was one time my youngest son asked me, he said, Mom, can you learn something without being told and taught it? And so I asked him, well, what's prompting that question? And he said, well, last week when we had visitors and they asked me if chickens can lay eggs if there's no rooster, I said, of course. And then I started thinking, well, how did I know that? And so that's the kind of aliveness that I really get excited about with when they start questioning and wondering. And so that realized how important that hands-on learning really is. And so then from there, the kids joined 4-H. And I took all the academic skills that I really felt that were important for them to learn and incorporated them in every one of their 4-H projects. And so they had a reason to be writing when they came at the end of the year. They had to do their project report. Well, rather than doing the 5 or 6 sentence project report, they did 3 to 5 page ones.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted them to really evaluate and really to think it through and use that as an opportunity to really write. And it was important to them, so they wanted to do it. They did the historical essay contests that was offered by the Historical Society. And we talked about it all year long. What was our topic going to be? And, they won. But it was fun because we were able to give back to like the Josie family, and because Juanita Newell was another one. And so that's the way we did it. That's the way we did it.
So were there at the time resources to help families do what you decided to? Because if you think about it, you were coming in with so many tools, and you were so well equipped to teach your children. But most people wouldn't have that, and even now most people
Right.
don't have that. So you were able to be successful and really expand the learning opportunities. But what would someone do at that time who had the idea and the vision, but maybe didn't have all the tools to get there and really be successful?
Well, about that time, the state of California required every school district to have what they called an independent study program. And some of them recognized homeschooling and some didn't. And so I joined the Calaveras Unified's independent study program, partly because every child that joins brings revenue into the district. But the other part of it was I know that there were other people out there who were wanting to homeschool, but as you say, didn't have the resources or didn't have the background. And eventually one thing led to another, and Mountain Oaks was founded.
And what is Mountain Oaks, for people who don't know?
Well, Mountain Oaks is a homeschool-based charter school. And it first was just a program from the county office of education. But eventually we were able to charter it. And that means that it is really an independent functioning. In fact, it's kind of its own little quirky thing because it's really a nonprofit that we chartered under, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But back to the very beginning, because it's grown so much
Yeah.
now. You basically talk with Bob Bach and who else at
Ron
the time?
Lewis.
And Ron Lewis, and the study program that Calaveras offered. You thought maybe there were other ways that you might want to go with your kids, and that other parents might want to go too. And so you had this discussion, and I mean, do you think it was kind of monumental that they actually supported you in your desire to do this? I mean, not everyone would be in support of something like that.
There wasn't anybody else. And when we traveled around the state and went to conferences and met with people and coached them and talked to attorneys, and we were the only charter school that had such a beautiful, supportive, collaborative working relationship with our sponsors. We were the only ones. And so I cannot express enough gratitude to the vision and the faith that Bob and Ron had in us. Because, we were a wild herring as such.
And it also was not without differing opinions, because as you said, when a student is enrolled in a school, that's kind of part of how the funding model works.
Yes.
And so for a student to be enrolled somewhere else and not in one of the main schools, that causes people to kind of say, boy, that could be detrimental to the school. And so that made it even more delicate, I imagine,
Yes.
to try to stay collaborative and positive when some people maybe didn't think it was a good thing.
Well, they didn't understand it. And there's that fear that there's going to be the unschooling, which they feared was that just do nothing. Now, my children didn't sit for 5 hours a day going through books. But when they did go to school, when they eventually, went to the schools, they were ahead of their peers.
So different paths to the same destination. Okay.
Exactly. So I saw such an incredibly qualitative change in my children through the homeschooling process that's where that fire just got lit within me that said, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life, to help other families to be able to experience that change, that closeness, that presence with them.
And you did dedicate your life to that. And just to give people kind of an example, the first year that Mountain Oaks started, how many students were there?
We started out with 16.
And then a year from then, what did it go up to?
106.
And then let's skip ahead many years. What are we at now?
We are at 400, close to 490.
So just short of 500 students. So, and what's the time frame in terms of years on that, roughly, would you say?
We had our 20th year anniversary last year.
Okay.
So there we are. We're here to stay.
Right.
Yes.
And I think, one thing that kind of reinforces that is this facility which has been built, which is just very permanent and very state of the art, and it's serving both Mountain Oaks and Calaveras River Academy.
Correct.
But the progression from the 16 students to there was you really started kind of in a small house in the beginning down by the end of San Andreas, and then you upgraded to a little bit of a bigger facility down on Churchill Road. So you kind of grew with the constraints that you had to kind of work under. And I know that this is a longer story, but I want to make sure we have time for some other things. But I do want you to touch on, as you realized, look, we need to build a bigger facility, we need to provide more space and more resources for these children. How did you end up being able to get the money to build the facility that people are in now?
That was the genius of John Brophy,
Former
superintendent.
Of
He
schools.
succeeded. Okay. And he found a very small window of a grant that was available to rural schools. And he said, okay, if we combine the population from Mountain Oaks and Calaveras River Academy, we'd have enough students. And if we can find our land, get our architectural drawings in place, get all the state approvals, we can get under this, because it was going to close, the window was going to close, and we did it.
And you did it, and you got approved, and it was many millions of dollars that came into the county and went to build that.
That's right. That's right. And that was part of it, is wanting to make sure that the contractors and the workers were local people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So does the facility, and this facility is now down off of Pool Station Road, just outside of San Andreas.
Yes.
Do you think that it was going to meet the needs of the homeschool population well into the future? Was it kind of a forward-thinking facility, or are you already bursting out of your walls?
Yes, we are bursting out. And, we really, really wanted to have a much more green facility. But with our time constraints and with budget and things like that, that's probably my only frustration with that, because it's so much harder to retrofit. And I could just see that this was the direction we wanted to go. But with the bursting out of the seams, we have two other facilities. We have one in Ione in Amador County and one in Sonora in Tuolumne County.
So you have kind of these satellite
Yes.
campuses that,
Yes.
and they all kind of work through the main building.
That's right.
Okay. And then you served as administrator for a very long time of Mountain Oaks, is that
Yes,
right?
about 17 years.
Okay. Now, because we only have 5 minutes left, I want to make sure...
Already? My goodness.
I want to make sure that we get to what you're doing now.
Yes.
Because I want to make sure people heard that story. But right now, you've stepped away from administrator and being as involved and kind of leading Mountain Oaks. And now, what are you focusing on currently?
I'm focusing on what I call leadership, but my passion, as it's evolving at this point, is connecting students with their community, helping them to learn and appreciate what makes a community, what are all the components of it, how it works, how to be involved, and kind of the joys of being involved. So last year I kind of modeled it after the Calaveras Leadership Program from the
Chamber.
Chamber, yes. And this year I'm still modeling it in that way, but a lot of focus has been on water, restoration of like Mantley Meadows, of Rimfire area. The other thing, but I'm taking a lot of lead with the kids. They want to go see the caves where the petroglyphs are, and things like that. So the idea is for them to realize we live in a very, very rich, historically area, and to not just be content to watching video games and doing stuff like that, getting out, doing, and learning.
And what's the name of this course that you're teaching?
Teens, Talents, and Opportunities.
And this is the second year that you've done this? Okay, and it's a small group, so you can really focus on, it's not like 36 or 40 students like sometimes you see in the classrooms.
Each student signs a confidentiality agreement, and it's a very safe place for them to basically grow and expand and bloom. And one of the things we're taking on as a project this year is Circle of Friends, which is making yourself available to somebody who may have a disability or is kind of isolated or may be a target of bullying or something, and being there for them, making them feel heard and respected and valuable.
And then the field trips that you've taken them on, as you just kind of mentioned, have just been amazing beyond just reading the books, but you're actually going to these places. Like you said, the rimfire devastated a huge section of Tuolumne County and other counties. So you actually went to a meadow restoration area and saw how it worked, right?
Yes, yes. Saw the before, became aware of all the different possible ways to do it, what the issues are, how it happened. Also, the Matley Meadow is great because it's half owned by forest and public lands and half privately owned by a rancher. And to see these entities working together and collaborating, it's wonderful. And that's the kind of thing I want them to see, that we can work together and make things really happen.
Right. And just in the minute we have left, what would you want to leave our audience with in terms of what you've learned and what you're hoping to achieve?
How important it is to be present, really present with whomever you are working and being with. Making sure that they feel heard and understood, whether it's students or your coworkers or your grandchildren, or because that's when communication really happens, and that's when you have the ability to lead them and to help them be connected with their world. That's it.
Thank you, Linda. Very
You're
very
welcome.
nice to have you on.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.